5th grade. It's Mrs. Pecora here, back with reading Roald Dahl's The Witches. So we left off, our character was sitting at his grandmother's knee, and she was saying about a witchophile, and he said, "What is that?" So let's continue reading to see what a witchophile is. Oh, and boys and girls, if you hear some strange noises, it's just my puppy playing with his toys. I'm trying to hide in a different room and read so you can hear me without him, but he sometimes manages to follow me. So anyways, here we go. Oops, let's see where we were reading. So he asked, "What is a witchophile, Grandmama?" And Grandmama replies, "A person who studies witches and knows a lot about them," my grandmother said. "Are you a witchophile, Grandmama?" "I am a retired witchophile," she said. "I am too old to be active any longer. But when I was younger, I traveled all over the globe trying to track down the Grand High Witch. I never came even close to succeeding." "Is she rich?" I asked. "She's rolling," my grandmother said, "simply rolling in money. Rumor has it that there is a machine in her headquarters, which is exactly like the machine the government uses to print the banknotes you and I use. After all, the banknotes are only bits and pieces of paper with special designs and pictures on them. Anyone can make them who has the right machine and the right paper. My guess is the Grand High Witch makes all the money she wants and dishes it out to witches everywhere." "What about foreign money?" I asked. "Those machines can make Chinese money if you want them to," my grandmother said. "It's only a question of pressing the right button." "But Grandmama," I said, "if nobody has ever seen the Grand High Witch, how can you be so sure she exists?" My grandmother gave me a long and very severe look. "Nobody has ever seen the devil," she said, "but we know he exists." The next morning we sailed for England, and soon I was back at my old family house in Kent, but this time with only my grandmother to look after me. Then the Easter term began, and every weekday I went to school, and everything seemed to have come back to normal again. Now, at the bottom of our garden, there is an enormous conker tree, and high up in its branches, Timmy, my best friend, and I had started to build a magnificent treehouse. We were able to work on it only at the weekends, but we were getting along fine. We had begun with the floor, which we built by laying wide planks between two quite far apart branches and nailing them down. Within a month, we had finished the floor. Then we constructed a wooden railing around the around the floor that left only, here's a picture of this treehouse, boys and girls, the roof to be built. The roof was the difficult bit. One Saturday afternoon, when Timmy was in bed with the flu, I decided to make a start on the roof all by myself. It was lovely being high up there in that conker tree, all alone, with the pale young leaves coming out everywhere around me. It was like being in a big green cave. And the height made it extra exciting. My grandmother told me that if I fell, I would break a leg, and every time I looked down, I got a little tingle along my spine. I worked away, nailing the first plank on the roof. Then suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a woman standing immediately below me. She was looking up at me and smiling in the most peculiar way. When most people smile, their lips go out sideways. This woman's lips went upwards and downwards, showing all her front teeth and gums. The gums were like raw meat. It is always a shock to discover that you are being watched when you think you are alone. And what was this strange woman doing in our garden anyway? I noticed that she was wearing a small black hat, and she had black gloves on her hands, and the gloves came up to nearly her elbows. Gloves? She was wearing gloves! I froze all over. "I have a present for you," she said, still staring at me, still smiling, still showing her teeth and gums. I didn't answer. "Come down out of that tree, little boy," she said, "and I shall give you the most exciting present you've ever had." Her voice had a curious rasping quality. It made sort of a metallic sound, as if her throat was full of drawing pins. Without taking her eyes from my face, she very slowly put one of those gloved hands into her purse and drew out a small green snake. She held it up for me to see. "It's tame," she said. The snake began to coil itself around her forearm. It was brilliant green. If you come down here, I shall give him to you. Oh, Grandmama, I thought, come and help me. Then I panicked. I dropped the hammer and shot up that enormous tree like a monkey. I didn't stop until I was high as I could possibly go, and there I stayed, quivering with fear. I couldn't see the woman now. There were layers and layers of leaves between her and me. I stayed up there for hours and kept very still. It began to grow dark. At last, I heard my grandmother calling my name. I'm up here, I shouted back. Come down at once, she called out. It's past your supper time. Grandmama, I shouted. Has that woman gone? What woman? My grandmother called back. The woman in the black gloves. There was silence from below. It was the silence of somebody who was too stunned to speak. Grandmama, I shouted again. Has she gone? Yes, my grandmother answered at last. She's gone. I'm here, my darling. I will look after you. You can come down now. I climbed down. I was trembling. My grandmother enfolded me in her arms. I've seen a witch, I said. Come inside, she said. You'll be all right with me. She led me into the house and gave me a cup of hot cocoa with lots of sugar in it. Tell me everything, she said. I told her. By the time I had finished, it was my grandmother who was trembling. Her face was ashy gray, and I saw her glance down at that hand of hers that didn't have a thumb. You know what this means, she said. It means that there is one of them in our district. From now on, I'm not letting you walk alone to school. Do you think she could be after me specifically? I asked. No, I doubt it, she said. One child is as good as any to those creatures. It was hardly surprising that after that I became a very witch-conscious little boy. If I happened to be alone on the road and saw a woman approaching who was wearing gloves, I would quickly skip across to the other side. And as the weather remained pretty cold during the whole of that month, nearly everyone was wearing gloves. Curiously enough, though, I never saw the woman with the green snake again. That was my first witch. But it wasn't my last. Summer holidays. Sorry, boys and girls. I don't know why this keeps moving. I'm trying to be very still. Okay. Summer holidays. The Easter holidays came and went, and the summer term began at school. My grandmother and I had already planned to take our summer holiday in Norway, and we talked about almost nothing else every evening. She booked a cabin for each of us on the boat from Newcastle to Oslo at the earliest possible moment after my school broke up. And from Oslo, she was going to take me to a place she knew down on the south coast near Arendal, where she had spent her own summer holidays as a child nearly 80 years ago. All day long, she said, my brothers and I were out in the rowing boat. The whole coast is dotted with tiny islands, and there's nobody on them. We used to explore them and dive into the sea off the lovely smooth granite rocks, and sometimes on the way out we would drop anchor and fish for cod and whiting, and if we caught anything we would build a fire on the island and fry the fish in a pan for our lunch. There is no funner fish in the world than an absolutely fresh cod. What did you use for bait, Grandmama, when you went fishing? Mussels, she said. Everybody uses mussels for bait in Norway, and if we didn't catch any fish, we would boil the mussels in a saucepan and eat those. Were they good? Delicious, she said. Cook them in seawater, and they are tender and salty. What else did you do, Grandmama? We used to row out and wave to the shrimp boats on their way home, and they would stop and give us a handful of shrimps each. The shrimps were still warm from having just been cooked, and we would sit in the rowing boat, peeling them and gobbling them up. The head was the best part. The head? I said. You squeeze the head between your teeth and suck out the inside. It's marvelous. You and I will do all those things this summer, my darling, she said. Grandmama, I said, I can't wait. I simply can't wait to go. Nor can I, she said. When there were only 3 weeks of the summer term left, an awful thing happened. My grandmother got pneumonia. She became very ill, and a trained nurse moved into the house to look after her. The doctor explained to me that pneumonia is not normally a dangerous illness nowadays because of penicillin. But when a person is more than 80 years old, as my grandmother was, then it is very dangerous indeed. He said he didn't even dare move her to the hospital in her condition, so she stayed in her bedroom, and I hung outside the door while oxygen cylinders and all sorts of other frightening things were taken into her. "Can I go in and see her?" I asked. "No, dear," said the nurse, "not at the moment." A fat and jolly lady called Mrs. Spring, who used to come and clean our house every day, also moved in and slept in the house. Mrs. Spring looked after me and cooked my meals. I liked her very much, but she wasn't a patch on my grandmother for telling stories. One evening, about 10 days later, the doctor came downstairs and said to me, "You can go in and see her now, but only for a short time. She's been asking for you." I flew up the stairs and burst into my grandmother's room and threw myself into her arms. All right, boys and girls, we're going to stop there for today. Let's stay tuned for tomorrow and see what else happens in The Witches. Bye-bye.